innovation. I'm Lori Joy Kingwell.
And I'm Chrissy Van. We're two dreamers on two wheels inspired by our community.
And celebrating the voices we're just lucky enough to discover along the ride. So if not already, like, subscribe, follow along, do what you gotta do to not miss an episode. A spark plug on a motorcycle is designed to ignite and create an explosion that produces power. As humans, we have a creative spark. Creativity is all about recognizing ideas, alternatives, and possibilities. It's about authentic thought being fully expressed and placed into the world. It involves taking ideas, imagination, and dreams and bringing them to reality. Often when we think about being creative, our thoughts go to bringing something grand or inspiring to fruition. But in reality, creativity is necessary in just daily life, and each day requires ingenuity and novel workarounds, problem solving. And by this logic, it becomes clear that everyone possesses some amount of creativity. Even those of you listening saying, well, no, not me. No, probably not me. What many of you may not realize is that creativity is a practice. It can be acquired or honed at any age or any experience level. So today's podcast is the Creative Spark Plug. And we're going to share how creativity works in the circuitry of your brain, how to build your creative muscle, and benefits of making space in your life to amplify your spark. This, my friends, is your motivation.
A creative life is an amplified life. It's a bigger life, a happier life, an expanded life, and a hell of a lot more interesting life. Living in this manner, continually and stubbornly bringing forth the jewels that are hidden within you is a fine art in and of itself. That is Elizabeth Gilbert. She has an amazing book that I read several years ago called Big Magic, Creative Living Beyond Fear. A 10 out of 10 recommend. And I know we normally end this podcast with a quote, but I just love the first line of that one. A creative life is an amplified life. We talk so much about how our brains, our imagination, our perception becomes our reality. And I feel in a lot of facets, creativity is really about re-engineering your perception. It's about diving into your inner workings. It's about thinking about possibilities. There is this misconception that people are either creative or they're not, or you have an idea or you don't, and that it's very black and white. You think that it's a skill that you either have or you're a have not, and that's not really how it works at all. Creativity involves us putting something into this world that makes it better. It is art. It is problem solving. It is engineering a thought out of the depths of our mind and diving into our subconscious and bringing that into our present reality. It's about providing something in this world that's an offering in a lot of times. And Lori and I are actually at pretty much the date of celebrating our 1-year anniversary of this podcast at the time of this recording. And why we thought it was so important to tackle this again is because creativity as well is a practice. It is something that doesn't come easy all the time because there's often not a reward immediately. Even before we started this recording, we're trying to engineer how we can hone more listeners and things like that. And it becomes a little difficult sometimes when you're putting creative work out there and not necessarily getting that feedback. A lot of people then give up on themselves. You become fearful. What will people think of this? What will people judge me for? And it's not about that. Creativity is such a necessary tool to amplifying your life, your lived experience. And so that is why we are having this discussion today, because there are ways to dive into our creative selves. If you don't view yourself as a creative being, there are ways for you to actually instill that within yourself if you put in the work. And I think that as creators, we often get so locked into the fact that we need to monetize any of our creative works. We know that obviously corporate world out there capitalizes on that, basically hammering out and grinding you to the bone to the fact that you feel like you have no more energy left to put that forth and express your true, authentic self. So that is why we're having the conversation today, because we want you to realize that to live a creative life, I think, is to live your life artfully. It is to live it beautifully. It is to live it fully. And it really is an offering to the world, because how incredible if we dive into the subconscious and bring our ideas to life. look around. Your whole world, as you perceive it, is really from the basis of everyone else's creative minds, everyone else's different viewpoints, because we are the only one of ourselves. And that is our superpower. And I really think that is what creativity brings to the forefront.
When you brought up the book, funny enough, that is the book that really made me look at creativity so differently. What was it called again? It's Elizabeth Gilbert. What was it called again?
Big Magic,
Big
Creative
Magic,
Living
yeah.
Beyond Fear. And I had so many
Oh.
crazy moments reading that book.
Right. And funny enough, one of my girlfriends who actually just got her first motorcycle and this is her first season riding, about a year or two ago, she had read the book around the exact same time as me. We started talking about this book, and she since then has started like extremely seriously writing a book. And she writes every day, and it's been over a year now, and she works on this book, and this book's amazing. And the reason I'm speaking to her in this book is that it's consistency. We wait so often to be, and we look at creativity as something to be inspired, and then we'll do it. We'll have the feeling to do it. We'll be inspired to do it. And we do have these moments where we'll see somebody else and it'll ignite something someone's playing. For me, a guitar, it makes me want to learn the guitar in a way that I can completely expand and listen to a song or look up chords and actually play. Because I can only really play a few chords, and the chords that I can play, I don't even know what they're called. I just learn them myself, sort of thing, to write my own music too. But I have such a love around music. But what happens is when I sit down to actually learn, it's not that fun in that moment. There's some mucky parts and some difficult parts and some challenging parts that I have to work through to really expand on that creativity and get to the other side. And as soon as we're in a state of discomfort, and or you spoke to fear, which fear is a huge one. What will people think? How will this look to, is this make me an oddball? Does this mean that I'm part of this group if I do this creative thing? And will I be made fun of, or whatever the storyline is in your head? The resistance that comes around fear or the challenge puts the brakes on. And we stop ourselves from being on the other side, which is the big expansion of self, like the parts of you that you can live out loud with. And one of the things I love about working with children and watching them is they are constantly in a state of creativity, and they're constantly failing. They're constantly doing difficult things, not without some, moans and groans here and there by all means, but they are the prime examples of watching how much it's innate in us and how much we have this natural drive to create. We're creating species, right? That's why we have the crazy world that we live in today, which I think we've gone a little overboard.
Just a touch.
But we are creators. And when you spoke about authenticity around that, no one can take in the world through your perspective. Nobody's had your experiences. Nobody has your innate abilities, your strengths, your weaknesses. All of that combined is you. And when you listen to that little voice inside of you, or you listen to those pings in you, that you see something that inspires you and to move forward and to go take a closer look or dabble in that or expand on that, that is getting you closer to being able to express yourself and getting closer to your version of creativity. And you got to know right off the bat. And this is something I didn't really know. I kind of knew, but I didn't really know. And this book was drastically helped me in that way, is that you have to know that the fear is going to come and it's never going to stop coming. You just have to know how to befriend it, and you have to know how to bypass it, because everything that you do is an expression of yourself, and the world is, works really hard to make sure that you try and eliminate that within yourself. And so there's going to be discomfort, and there's going to be the challenge of failing and not knowing what you're doing. But there's so much incredible beauty and creativity within you that you get to tap into when you start to realize that, take action around that, and move through that.
I love that you say befriend the fear. That's a takeaway. Befriend the fear, because it's true. It is going to walk alongside you. And one of the ideas that's in the Elizabeth Gilbert book that I think struck such a chord in me was talking about ideas and where they come from. Have you ever had those moments where all of a sudden your brain And more than likely, these moments have happened when you're either at rest, in a meditative state, you're in a state of flow, whether you're listening to some powerful music or you're exercising is a big one for me. But all of a sudden, you're slammed with an idea. And sadly, that moment is where a lot of people's creative journeys, if they're looking to bring something to life, ends. It ends right there at the idea. And that idea is a gift. And I truly do believe that these ideas, I understand that there is circuitry in our brain of how and Lori, you'll be able to speak to this better than myself neurologically, but there are a lot of things working in tandem in our brains when it comes to creative thought. But beyond that, I am a believer that some of these ideas are a true gift from the universe. And all of a sudden, when it is brought to you, that is where the decision needs to be made. Will I bring this to the forefront? Will I bring this to life? And the reality is, a lot of things stop at that idea stage. And then furthermore, they stop when the work comes in. And that's exactly what it is in regards to, we think all of a sudden we're going to get this idea and just like, whoosh, there's your friend's book written, whoosh, I painted a masterpiece. And it doesn't work that way at all. In reality, to become a truly creative individual, and again, we all use creativity to an extent, day over day. We're constantly problem solving. I'm sure in your career life as well, you're having to look at things differently all the time, come up with new ideas. But when you're talking about really truly diving into your creative self and taking advantage of those aha light bulb ideas that you're gifted, they stop because most of the time, our first drafts or our first while isn't necessarily our best work. The podcast itself is a great example, and I find it so fascinating. Lori and I always have little chats before we start, and we talk about where it began, coming up on this 1 year. Were our first episodes the greatest? No. But what have we done over the last year? Consistently produce content. What has happened throughout that year? We've gotten better. We've been able to pivot. All of a sudden, more ideas, more approaches start to percolate in the mind. And it really runs in parallel of some of the other aspects that we've talked to in life when it comes to momentum, when it comes to motivation. All those things happen. Watch, I can't even say motivation properly anymore. I called it motivation, but I meant motivation. But when those things come to you, it really is in the practice of consistency that you're able to expand from there. Because if you're not constantly practicing, the expansion will not take place. Our minds could have that explosion, that spark. You can see in your subconscious all the colors, all the music, all the whatever it is for you in your form of expression. But if you're not actually constantly churning it out and getting over the fact that it may not be your best, that there may be failure, that there may be judgment, you're not having the opportunity for yourself to really become an expansively creative individual. And that is, I think, the beauty of life, because creative work is a gift, I think, to the world. And the reason why I feel that way is again, looking around at all the marvels, almost everything tactile you can touch around you as you're listening. Maybe you're driving your car. Maybe you have your earbuds in. Somebody came up with these devices, like a fellow human being. These ideas came out of their brain. And when you realize that, I hope it helps remind you of the capability these beautiful brains of ours have. And every single one of those people, when that idea first came to mind, it was probably a wild idea. And what did they probably say to themselves? I don't know if that's going to work, but I'll try. And they did. And I think there is nothing worse than stopping ourselves at that light bulb moment. And unfortunately, that is where most of our creative dreams, unfortunately, go to die. That gift eventually, maybe it moves on to another person and they bring it to life. Maybe it flutters away and the world doesn't get to experience it.
Yeah, when you spoke earlier about the idea, when you spoke to also, how the brain works in and around that as well. I'm with you, Chrissy, on I'm a very firm believer as well on like the ideas that come to us, the visions, whatever you want to call them. It's a gift, and it's something that is coming to you and through you potentially for the rest of the world. But if anything else, it's something that is an expression of self. But what happens is, and which you said, is a lot of times it stops there. And why it stops there is because you and the good old brain get in the way, because it will go as far as your habits will take it. It will only go as far as your practices will take it. And so if you are in the practice and your habit is of quitting when things are uncomfortable or hard, or you're in the practice of worrying and getting so overwhelmed with what people think and what people may or may not approve of, or if you on your day-to-day life look at everything that's not working, then all of these gifts that are given to you will dissipate and go elsewhere, because you're not utilizing them. You're not honoring them. And you have to do the other part too, because it's easy to say, well, you know, make the fear your friend or all those different things, but that's a practice too. We just talked about it in one of our last episodes around choosing your ride, of like choosing the day you're going to have, regardless of the day, of what happens externally. Of you have to decide that you're going to make this a practice, and in small ways, and almost like following the breadcrumbs, right? Like just follow what's the next little breadcrumb. You've got this big idea, sit down and map out what that even looked like to achieve that idea, or just start dipping into things in and around that idea. So like a guitar, let's go back to the guitar that I spoke about. If you just start watching guitar solos on YouTube or lessons on YouTube, that's the kind of thing that I've just started exposing myself to. Even if I can't sit down with it, at least my brain is being exposed to it. At least that's being taken in cognitively in one way or another, even if I can't sit down and do the action. But then moving towards sitting down and actually saying, I'm going to give this 10 minutes of plucking away at the strings or learning just one chord and practicing that for this week. Today, I kid you not, because I've been working. I love to sing, and I'm so out of it with singing that I was like, oh, I got to get my singing voice back. You know, it's a part of my expression of self. And so I was doing my singing lessons in the kitchen. And when I was hitting the terrible high notes, I kid you not, my dog started whining and panicking because it was so bad. And I was like dying laughing. I was like, Marley, I'm just singing, man. I'm just doing the best that I can. And like, Dave's in the other room on a Zoom work call. And there's a chance that who's on the other line with him is like, who's dying in the kitchen? What cat's being stepped on? I felt myself even in my head being like, this is embarrassing. You're doing bad singing lessons in the kitchen while you're emptying the dishwasher. And like other people can hear you. The dog is whining and moaning. But it was that reminder to myself was like, do I want to choose being embarrassed and shutting this down? Or do I want to dip back into the like deep joy and just soul therapy that my singing and writing music offers me? And I kept on that damn singing lesson in the kitchen because my habits with life have changed and my priorities have changed. And this podcast has been a huge thing that's lent that to all areas of my life, because I'm so consistent in this part of my life that I've now been able to plug that into so many different aspects of my life as well. And it's just those things of like, you have to take action and you have to prioritize it. My girlfriend that's writing the book, she does it every single morning before she starts her day. She spends an hour writing. Doesn't matter if she writes well that day. She writes. And she's become a writer in the past year and a half, and a damn good writer. Like the kind of shit where I'm not just like, this is good because it's my friend. I'm like, finish this book. I want to know what happens. And so it's getting past that just concept of like, I had the idea and now I'm going to do it and poof, I'm it. It's like, you have to change and know going in, making the decision to commit to it and be consistent to it. It's the only way to it.
Quantity is actually better than quality when it comes to your creative self.
Yeah.
And again,
yes,
so many people would think it's counterintuitive, but here's the reason why is that any creative works that are highly celebrated. And again, we're not talking about the fact you need to go out and be Mozart. We're talking about the fact that it feels fucking damn good in life to be a creative person.
Yeah.
But what ends up happening is that the works that are celebrated are the ones that no one ever saw Mozart learn how to play an instrument, or Picasso's first painting, you just assume that these people were always at their height. And so as a result, you almost discount yourself. Well, I'm not there. Or the singing is such a good example because yourself, along with pretty much almost everyone else on the planet, when the pandemic hit at the beginning 2+ years ago, so many people had no choice but to take pause. And I do think that that is where a lot of our creative ideas do happen. We are always so distracted by life that we ignore our sense of consciousness. And as a result, we just make ourselves essentially too busy, that we are so distracted in life that we never dive into the inner sides of ourselves. But at the beginning of the pandemic, all of a sudden people were rediscovering their creative passions, and they kind of got rid of their last fuck about the fact that maybe they weren't good. They were going to take the time because they carved out the time to do so. And so for yourself with singing, a lot of people would go back to it. You do have a gift, you have a talented voice. But if you're not exactly where you were the last time, you're like, well, I'm not good enough. And then I just want to scrap it. And this is why you're practicing, which I'm convinced that Marley, as well as a singer, was singing with you and just was also a little bit not great.
I like that perspective a lot more than the reality, for sure.
Right. I think it was a duet for sure. And Marley was like, hey, I'm rusty too. Like, we're in this together.
We're going to cry like cats together, Mom. Let's do this.
But the only way that you're going to continue to fall into that passion and continue within that creative side in yourself is exactly that. Quantity, dedicating time and space to do this. One element of creativity you have to remind yourselves of as well is, yes, there are, I think, personality traits that lend themselves to being more creative individuals, but it doesn't mean you can't hone the skill. And one thing that I find is the differentiator between people that lean more into their creative selves or lean out is how open they are to experiencing life outside the box, life outside of the routine. People that are closed off to new experiences generally are closing themselves off to their creative self. Whereas if you're open to experiencing new foods, things that aren't familiar to you, you're constantly making your brain see the world through a different lens, a different perception. And essentially what creativity is looking at the lens differently in your mind and pushing that out through you. Having an authentic idea, feeling, thought, and letting that move through you. And then every single time I say putting out into the world, I'm not saying your works need to be heard by the billions of people around the planet. I'm just the firm believer that we're all connected to a degree. So I do think the more offerings we have from the creative space collectively makes the world a better place, because generally people that are creating for good, it has a positive impact. Anyone that has been touched by the work of another, or had a song make them cry, or had a piece of art that moved their soul, knows that our creative expressions hold a lot of power, which again ties back to the fact that I think that they come from something well beyond ourselves as we understand the universe, because we do have limitations in a sense to the unknown, which is a beautiful thing. I do think that it comes, to quote Soul, from the great beyond.
It doesn't have to be what we kind of even put in the box as well of creativity when it comes to the arts, right? We only think of it really in the arts, but your strength could be being a leader, and you could get really creative and start to expand on how to lead and try different ways and look deeper into how to be more connected leader.
Yeah.
Or it could be in and around, you enjoy food and all the different types of, or cooking, and you're going to create different recipes and just, it doesn't have to be the creativity that we immediately think about. It can be absolutely any area of your life. It's just something that you light up inside that you would do, that you didn't have to be paid a cent to do it. And you enjoyed that. And if you are like, I don't have anything like that, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist for you. It just means that you haven't maybe been listening, or you're living a little bit, might be in too much in that box in life, or, you're doing things that are exhausting you so much in a day that you feel like you got nothing to give to anything. when you do have a little time to yourself. And so maybe the first step is nurturing yourself a little bit more. When you do have that window, even if it's 5-10 minutes where you do something nice for yourself, even just giving yourself a hug, try it right now. Just put your arms around yourself, give yourself a big squeeze. It actually releases hormones and all good stuff just by hugging yourself. So you have time to hug your own ass. You have time, but be gentle with yourself and see what kind of comes out of, like, what did you used to do, like doing as a kid, even maybe there's something to it. That's why those out of coloring books blew up, and just start to just open your mind to notice, even if it starts there. Cause we think it's such a, like you see somebody that's just so eccentric and creative and you're just like, oh, that's a creative. I'm not that. We all are. It's impossible not to be a creator because you are a human and you have this big old brain. And why we're kind of pushing it too, of like, do this, go out and do this. They're like, find something, but do this, is because your quality of life goes up. Because if you're ignoring parts that are instinctually part of you and part of the food that feeds your brain and your soul and, your body, is creativity, is expanding on self and sharing that, even if it's just sharing it within your home, even if it's just sharing your beautiful voice with your dog, but it's going to bring you closer to yourself. It's going to bring you closer to other people and connection and more in tune with everything. Quality of life goes up. That means you're kinder as a human. That means life goes smoother for all, including yourself. So it doesn't have to be the quintessential creative. It can be small, on the smallest, simplest scale, but it's, authentically you. So that's beautiful.
And I'm glad that you say that, because it is true. And the more that you flex your creative muscle, the more you're able to integrate it into the little moments of life or the big ones. But yeah, your sex life is an area that you can become more creatively imaginative. And trust me, you do that, it's going to enrich your life in a big, big way. At work is another area. If you have a certain task or project that you're working on, maybe you decide to think, how would I view this if I was coming from this person's perspective? And you put yourself in somebody else's shoes. That's a way of using your creative thought, trying to think differently, think out of our normal habitual patterns. And so as soon as you start using this creative muscle, you're going to notice that it actually increases your contributions in all these different little nooks and crannies of your life. Maybe what you put out there doesn't work or wasn't as you thought in your head at the time. That's okay. Like, the whole point is just giving it a try. We don't always have creative wins, but I think that any creative effort is a win, because it's a lot better than just locking yourself into a mundane routine and essentially training your brain to only do what it's ever known. What is the fun in that in life? Like, it's like being given, when you're little, I don't know if you ever had the Crayola crayon pack. It was like in a little red container and there were hundreds of colors in there. And literally living in your routine is using the grayscale palette and just ignoring the rest. One kid, if they had to do that, would be pretty fucking disappointed. Why would you do that to yourself as an adult? Honestly.
You know what? My brain went to the weirdest metaphor when you were saying the crayon box. I was like, it's like Mario Brothers, and you only go into the first level and you've mastered that. And you're like, I'm good here. And you just play that level over and over and over again because you don't want to have to, and I was like, why would Mario Brothers? And then I was like, oh, because you played it a few weeks ago.
And you would never make it to the Star World. And that is just not a fun time. I have dominated the Mario verse.
I'm saying.
For the record.
Yeah. Turns out I still had my Flavor Flav and playing.
Still got it.
Yeah. The little guy, my little buddy Hudson, he's 6.5. And he was like, whoa, you're really good at this. And I was just like, no big deal.
Isn't it funny though, when a kid says that to me and it's a video game or thing, you're like, yeah, I know some things.
Yeah.
That could be the ultimate compliment.
100%. I was like, yeah, there was some 3 a.m. games happening when I was a kid. Spent some hours on here, bruh.
Totally. Well, it's because he didn't just play level 1 the entire time. kept on persevering.
Expanding. That was my, yeah. And I'd like to think that wasn't my biggest creative achievement, but here we are.
But that's the whole point. You can integrate it in any facet of your life. And we've been talking about building creative muscle. So perhaps we should share with people how they should do that.
Well, pick something that you just already know. If you already know that you enjoy doing, I'm going to kind of jump to the folks that you're like, there's something you like cooking. You've always wanted to sew, play an instrument. You wondered maybe, could I ever sing properly if I actually committed to some lessons? There's so many amazing lessons on YouTube that you just free, right? Guitar lessons free, all that stuff online. And we just have access to learn absolutely anything you want. But if there's something that has always kind of spoke to you, choose one thing and then make a deal with yourself that the very first day, maybe you research and you get all the things that you need in place. And then the second day, but create a time, like an alarm on your phone. You set it. It's like an appointment. You do not miss it with yourself. You do not push it back. You can even make a little thing where you're like, if I push it back, then this is my consequence, sort of thing. And make it like something really, I have to clean the bathroom instead. Like either I do this or I clean the bathroom. And so suddenly that seems, yeah, of course I'm going to choose that. That's how I got my singing lessons in, is I set a timer and like, that's what I do at that time right now. It's like an appointment because I kept putting it off and off and off, and set that appointment and just start and just keep consistent. And you'll notice suddenly you'll look forward to it. Suddenly it'll just become the thing that you do at that time. But consistency is the key. It is the grandmaster key to really getting to the place where this becomes a creative expression and you build and follow the breadcrumbs with it. But consistency, make a little plan, get to it, enjoy it, and become the opera singer that you've always wanted to be.
It's funny talking about singing. We did not sing motivation maintenance. And I thought that you were going to hit the high note.
Oh, okay. Let me try it here. Motivation maintenance. Marley just peed in the hallway. I'm sure of it.
Motivation maintenance. So my motivation maintenance, because you want to know how to hone your creativity. We said in the beginning, I know some people don't view themselves as a creative, but based on the conversation, now you understand that being a human means you're a creative being, and it could just be a matter that you are out of practice. So going back to Elizabeth Gilbert, and again, if you haven't, big magic, take the book out at a used bookstore or your local library.
Yes.
Literally, it's so, so good. But on the idea of those big ideas, for just 1 week, I want you to have your notes, whether on your phone or if you prefer voice notes. But anytime you have one of those like aha thoughts that enter your brain, write it down. Write it down, because sometimes those little glimpses of inspiration I find go one of two ways. It's like this fleeting thought. Let's say I'm on the stair climber, which is always somehow where my good ideas happen. I have this fleeting thought. I'm so amped up about it. And then I finish my workout. I have my shower. I sit down and then I'm like, fuck, what the hell was that thing I was so excited about?
Yes.
And it's gone. And it's the worst crushing feeling. And you're not guaranteed that will come back. So I feel like those are a drive-by where they're like, sorry, too slow, off to the next person. So write it down. They happen the other way. The second way that they happen are the ones that keep beating you over the goddamn head, which I've talked about before, happened with this podcast. I have the journal to prove it. When I wrote down at the time, motivated millennial, went through different evolutions, and I was not taking any action. And so that idea was just sitting, and it could have still been sitting if I hadn't had this wonderful universal cosmic moment I feel I shared with Lori, and then I had this aha moment. This is who I'm doing it with. And then finally, she was basically the one that honed my ass to being like, all right, we're going to sit down, and consistency became the name of the game from there. But start writing down your ideas as they happen. And to help percolate that, if you feel like, I'm sorry, the universe keeps skipping me and I'm not having any of these, I guarantee most likely it is because you are probably in a state that you're not allowing yourself enough rest. And I don't mean a good night's sleep. I mean moments for yourself moments of self-reflection. I have gotten caught in that several times where you end up allowing the experiences of daily life to just burn you out to the core. And what happens when that goes on? You stop leaning into your creative self, and it starts to become more of like the logical side of your brain that seems to take over, the habit side of your brain, where you're basically just spinning in the wheel that you know to spin and stepping in the same place all the time. So make sure that you're making those spaces for yourself. And thirdly, to get these ideas going, just start doing habitual things differently. Take the different route home. Decide to challenge yourself. If there's a recipe that you know down pat, be like, I'm going to eliminate 2 of the spices that I normally use and do things differently. Because if you start challenging your brain in these small little ways, that is going to help exercise all the circuitry business that's going on to allow you to start seeing things differently and viewing things differently and really thinking creatively.
Va. I love that. And in case you don't write it down or writing down I do voice memos. They work amazing. And I title them right afterwards so I don't forget same thing, Chrissy. I take a sauna every single morning after my workouts, and like all these ideas are just like bang, 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 bang. So I'm just like voice memoing everything, or in the kitchen or whatever, when I'm out for walks. Same thing. I think I've got them. I think I've held them in my brain. And if I do not write them down or voice memo, they are gone. These flashes of, where you're just like, God, I see it so clearly. And so voice memo, if you can't write in your notes, because everyone obviously has their phones with them. So either write in your notes or voice memo and title it so that you have an easy reference to go back. Otherwise it'll just be like voice memo number 92. Like, I don't know, And so,
definitely.
Yeah. So, but I just think all of those points, if you're going to choose anyone's motivation maintenance to really go to Chrissy's. Those were fantastic. So,
Teamwork makes the dream work.
Dreamwork makes the dream work.
The dream work. Lori, we started with a quote, but of course we're always going to end with a quote. So what is your quote today?
It's by Sam Horn. Creativity is simply connecting new dots in new ways. Now that I said it, though, it does seem a bit wah, wah, wah. But you know what?
No.
Here we are.
I like it.
I appreciate your backup on it.
Moral support. Quote.
Always there for me. My dog's singing with me. Likes my singing. Your quote wasn't terrible. This is why. I appreciate you.
Right? It's surround yourself with people that help cultivate the goodness of life.
Apparently I need a self-esteem boost as I'm saying these things. I was like, I'm going to go hug myself and put lotion all over my body after this.
Solid life plan. Solid life.
This is where I'm at in life, folks.
Well, my quote is from John Mason. You were born an original. Don't die a copy. And that is your motivation.
You've just listened to the Motivation Podcast with your host, Chrissy Van, and me, Lori Joy Kingwell.
Thanks for joining us along the ride. We've got new episodes dropping every Monday, and we're all about community. So follow us on Instagram at Motivation Podcast and visit our website at themotivation.com.
And in the meantime, tanks full and full throttle.